What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of MUT Tips. I'm your host, Sean Taylor from the Made Up Theater. And before we jump in, make sure to like the video, comment with somebody you would like addressed in a future video, and as always, subscribe on YouTube to be informed of upcoming videos. Now let's jump into today's topic, which is improvising the long-form narrative, part 4. I've been mostly focusing on the structure of the improvised narrative in terms of characters, relationships, story beats, but now I want to focus on something really important, which is play. We need to put the play in improvised plays. And when I first got started with improv, I wasn't very into play, even though I should have been. But when I eventually joined the group, which is called 5Play, the group that eventually created Made Up Theater, we did the improvised narrative piece. And something that we always injected into our stories that separated us from a lot of improv groups is that style of playing with each other, you know? We told a story, but we didn't let the story interfere with our ability to just have fun on stage. And when we're doing improv, one of my favorite things to do is the improvised narrative. I want to have fun. I want to have fun with the characters, with the actions, with the relationships, with our journey from start to finish, completing a story that's never been done before. A great way to just start practicing play is a really cool exercise where you're essentially going to invent a game on the spot. So, you know, the game of like Duck, Duck, Goose is a game that does exist. It has rules, but now instead you're going to get a title of a game that does not exist. You know, like, you know, it could be a verb or adjective, noun, something like that. So like frolicking frogs. And one at a time, each person in your group is going to start the game and just start to heighten the game and kind of explore what the rules of this game of frolicking frogs in this case is, you know? Like it might start with just a simple action of one person just does one hop. And then maybe the next person decides to do 2 hops. Maybe the next person decides to do 3 hops, you know? And maybe that's just the introductory rule of like, okay, so the next person who comes out has to hop one more than the previous person, right? But maybe there's another rule that's in there to kind of make it not repetitious, right? You know, the game of Duck, Duck, Goose. The duck, if that was just the game, just doing duck, that's kind of boring. The goose is the exciting part. So maybe instead, at some point, one person decides to jump over everybody who's on stage, right? And maybe that resets the game or adds in some other new creative rule to the game. And at the end of the game, when you decide to end it, you know, have the group discuss, like, what were the rules of the game? How did you explore the rules? Was there any exciting parts that maybe incorporated in play? Try that out. It's a great exercise to practice thinking alike, because when we're improvising narratives, we gotta think alike. The first element of play is the most common way to play on stage, and that's action, doing something on stage, right? We wanna show, not tell. A scene on stage that is being improvised should be both equally as amusing to a deaf person and a blind person. If I'm sitting in the audience and I choose to cover my ears, I should understand kind of what's happening on stage rather than just seeing 2, you know, static heads talking to each other based on their interaction with each other, you know, their proximity to each other, their facial expressions, how they're utilizing the environment, the space that they're setting up. A great example is from the movie 10 Things I Hate About You. There's a really fun scene during the movie where Heath Ledger comes out and sings a song to Julia Stiles. And the play in that scene is not just the bold choice of him being in the stands of this, you know, this school stadium, singing a song to Julia Stiles and just like the reaction of everybody on the field. But it's also like there's security guards who come in and try to like catch him, and there's play involved in that because Heath Ledger is like evading them and like slapping one on the butt. And there's fun in that. Again, it's a bold choice of expression to the person that he's addressing, Julia Stiles in this case. So a lot of times play can also drive the story forward. This is just heightening an emotion that one character feels towards another person. Another aspect of play is through repetition, you know, establishing patterns on stage that can sometimes be referred to as like a running gag. A great example is from the movie that has a lot of improv in it, so I recommend it, is Best in Show, where there's a relationship between Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara's characters, right? And throughout the course of this movie, various like past relationship people encounter Catherine O'Hara and kind of refer to a past sexual experience that they had. And Eugene Levy just kind of looks on in discomfort. And it just, every time it is repeated, we like remember the past instance, and thus the pattern continues to evolve. And usually the continuation just becomes like more outlandish or more absurd. And it's a fun pattern that is established. So anytime like something on stage happens that you thought was, you know, fun, funny, or something that you can expand upon in future scenes, like don't forget about it. Put it in your back pocket and, you know, keep doing it, because the audience, they love to see patterns, you know? That's how games like Duck, Duck, Goose, that's how that game is usually explored. So play around with patterns, repetition on stage, because it's rewarding the audience for paying attention, and it's rewarding you for investing in what you have created. Another aspect of play that goes hand in hand with repetition and patterns is heightening, which, you know, is that, but it's also making it bigger and bigger and bigger each time you revisit it. A great example of this is from the movie Airplane, where there's a great pattern that's established by Lloyd Bridges' character, where, you know, he first, based on the, you know, progression and just the high stakes of the plot, he says, you know, I picked a hell of a week to quit smoking. Just like, you know, kind of a random throwaway line, but it's embraced as the movie continues, because it comes back to him and he, you know, he refers to quitting drinking, and then he refers to quitting amphetamines, and then he refers to like quit like sniffing glue is kind of like the topper of it. And that's how you remember that character, is through the patterns of heightening that is established in that. So again, if you're establishing a pattern, you don't want to always just revisit it and just do the thing that you did. Like, see if you can make it bigger and evolve the choice so that it still fits in with the pattern, but you also do have the creativity to expand upon it. And one more opportunity for play comes in the form of gifts. Gifts that we give each other in our improv, and these could be action-based, dialogue-based, character-based, but it's something that we might establish ourselves, but give it to somebody else for them to do, because it heightens something within the story. And I'll give an example of this. This is usually seen a lot in buddy cop movies, okay? So in the movie Hot Fuzz, featuring Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, Simon Pegg is the hard-ass, straight-laced character who like does everything by the book. He has no fun in his life, he's very strict, and Nick Frost becomes his partner, and he's like a bumbling sidekick, kind of naive, and he has an affinity for action movies, okay? That's what he wants to become. And throughout the progression of the film, you know, Simon Pegg's character starts to like lower his guard to the point where he starts to like, you know, gain the same affinity for action movies. And at the end of the movie, he's literally become an action hero, doing a crazy choreographed scene that's really fun to watch, and it's even more satisfying because we know how Simon Pegg's character started, and now we see where he is now. And another good example comes in the form of more of you know, a romance story in Titanic, okay? I remember watching this movie in theaters, and there was a point in the movie showing where the audience applauded thunderously, and this came in the form of a gift. Early on in the movie, you know, when Leonardo DiCaprio's character Jack and Kate Winslet's character of Rose, they meet and interact, there's a moment in the film where Jack starts to teach Rose how to spit, you know, kind of like spit like a man rather than, you know, being like the more like high class, you know, lady. And there's a fun callback to it later on where Rose evades Billy Zane's like antagonistic character by spitting in his face, and the audience like applauded so loud. And that's something that you can get in your improvised narratives by calling back a gift, but it's not done by Jack in this case, it's done by Rose. It helps initiate a status shift where she gets one up on the antagonist who kind of like was higher status to her throughout the entire film. So gifts, give each other gifts in improvised narrative because they can promote play. In the previous video, I talked about improvising a high school story, which is an easy story to approach because we've all been through high school. We all know there's drama and characters and relationships that we are kind of familiar with, right? We could put our own little creative spin on it though. Now let's talk about another style, which is another simple narrative, and that's the love story, or you can think of it as like the romantic comedy. And it's a great way to practice play because there's a lot of actions, heightening, and just emotions that go into these stories, okay? And the easiest way to think about this is an improvised romantic comedy or a love story follows three simple beats, okay? A meets B, A loses B, A gets B back, okay? That's a very simple structure to it. You know, A can be any character, any gender, it's up to you, and B also any character, any gender, it's up to you how you wish to approach it. And it's satisfying because it has the first exploration of the relationships, you know? Think about like any classic romantic comedy when two people kind of like bump into each other for the first time. There's that first meeting, and they are kind of strangers, right? And in improv, we say, oh, don't do strangers. A lot of romantic comedies are usually based in strangers meeting and falling in love. And the interaction that they have in the beginning is where the play comes in, you know? In the movie The Notebook, there is like a fun scene where, you know, Ryan Gosling's character, you know, does a really extreme action where he like jumps on a Ferris wheel to essentially show his attraction to somebody. And that's a fun, memorable scene, all based in action and play. So let's delve into a few other ways to approach the improvised romantic comedy. A great way to practice this is through silent scenes, okay? Have an interaction between two characters. Think of them as like the leading stars of this romantic comedy movie that you might be about to perform. And just play around with a few different like encounters. Like maybe two people are meeting for the first time, okay? Like again, that bumping into each other motion, but again, no dialogue, it's all through silence. And maybe another one is like maybe the first date, okay? Where they actually do go past just that first meeting and start to interact with each other on maybe a more romantic level. Another premise that you can do is maybe they're people who maybe don't like each other, right? Some romantic comedies follow that formula where it's like two people who maybe don't connect with each other right away, but throughout the progression of the movie, they find a way to like come together, right? Those are fun little stories because they're different. So practice different premises that might be within a romantic comedy movie, or in this case, a long-form improvised narrative, but get rid of the dialogue, okay? Focus on the interaction, the proximity, the facial expressions, and don't act like you're talking to each other. Like, you know, it's not a silent movie, it's a silent scene, okay? No dialogue. Think of it as like these two people maybe are in a situation where maybe they can't talk to each other, okay? They can only interact with each other through their actions. The cool thing about the romantic comedy premise is it's very much not focused on the plot. Yes, there's story beats. They, you know, meet for the first time, right? They have that fallout. They have that moment where they come back together. Those are story beats, but it's all based on just the interaction of the characters, the relationship. Romantic comedies are a relationship story. There's no exposition, there's no like weird fetch quests, you know, that are based in like fantasy or sci-fi. There's just strictly a story about these two people, okay? So start by practicing a long-form narrative, and maybe if you want to take it easy, just focus on two characters, don't worry about other side characters, and start with just an interaction with them for the first time, the meeting. And then maybe the next scene that you do can be another scene based around them exploring the relationship a little more, like a date, or, you know, the moment when they really fall in love with each other, you know? You could do maybe 2 or 3 of these types of scenes. Just show the relationship growing, okay? And maybe expose flaws too. Romantic comedies, the characters have flaws, okay? There's jealousy involved. There's maybe insecurity involved, shyness, anxiety. These things usually lead to the fallout of the relationship, which you can then do after you show the scenes where the relationships grow. Do that scene where there is a fallout. Maybe explore a reason why the two would not be together, you know? It could technically be an external factor, like a person, like, you know, someone more antagonistic coming into the picture. But if you want, you can easily just do it between the two characters, you know? Sometimes the antagonists in romantic comedies are the protagonists themselves. They are their own worst enemy. And then after that, see if you can find a way for them to come back together in some climactic scene, you know? The cliche thought is like, oh, showing up at the airport and confessing and their love for each other, professing it to each other, right? That's another thing that you could do. It's a cliche, but just see if you can find a way for these two characters to come back to each other or reach a resolution. There are a lot of romantic comedies that also end with them not getting back together. They kind of realize that they're not meant for each other, but it still finds a way to end on like a good note rather than a negative, sad, depressing note. Play around with this narrative structure, okay? It won't be perfect. If you want, you can always pause and talk about potential. And then reset, up to you. Approach it however you want, but again, keep it simple. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this episode of MUT Tips. Thank you so much for checking it out. If you enjoyed the video, as I said, like, comment, subscribe, it's all helpful. Thank you so much, everybody. I'll see you next time for another episode of MUT Tips. Bye.